It's a busy one this week. BMC dominate in the Tour de Suisse. We've got the biggest race on the women's calendar, the OVO Energy Women's Tour, the Route d'Occitanie, the Under-23 Giro d'Italia, an update on the world of ultra endurance with the Trans Am, the RAAM and the Tour Divide, and for the first time ever on the GCN Racing News Show, we've got a Brompton race. And the end-to-end record here in the UK has been broken. We better get started. And we are going to start with the Tour de Suisse. This time last week, we had seen BMC Racing take the opening team time trial and Sagan the opening road stage. And it would be BMC who would dominate from start to finish. Stefan Kung held onto the yellow jersey through stage 3, which was won with an impressive sprint by Sonny Colbrelli, and indeed through stage 4 too. There, it was Chris Jensen of Mitchelton Scott who attacked from the breakaway and managed to stay clear of the bunch on a rain-soaked stage to Gstaad. Jensen is a rider who spends most of his time riding for other riders, and looking at the reaction of his peers on social media, he's definitely one of the more liked guys in the pro peloton. That was a very popular win indeed. Kung finally relinquished the leader's jersey on the first mountain stage, which came on day 5, but then he passed it on to the shoulders of his teammate and team leader, Richie Porte. It was the Italian Diego Ulissi who took that stage, but the finale had been animated by Mikel Landa of Movistar, whose recent training has clearly gone to plan. Christ almighty! The break also took the spoils the following day into Gomesveld. Soren Kragh Andersen getting the better of Nathan Haas there, but there was disappointment for Aqua Blue Sport and Mark Christian. He had been a part of that breakaway, only to get dropped on the final climb due to a mechanical problem on his bike. Team manager Rick Delaney later tweeted this lab rat thing is now costing results. Sorry again, Mark. Which was quite interesting. Aqua Blue Sport, as you will well know, have been the first pro team to use a single front chainring, an experiment which perhaps isn't going quite to plan, judging by that reaction. Nairo Quintana fans had plenty to cheer about though on stage 7. The Colombian climber went clear at the foot of the final climb to Arosa, an audacious move given that there were still 27 kilometres remaining. It was a gamble, which paid off though, at least with a stage win, even if it wasn't quite enough to lever himself into the yellow jersey, with Richie Porte finishing 22 seconds back after some incredible teamwork from Greg Van Avermaet. The final sprint showdown came on the penultimate stage, where Arnaud Démare showed some ominous form ahead of the Tour de France. He outpaced Fernando Gaviria to the line. Incidentally, that was the third second place for Gaviria at the race. He was never quite able to take a win, which means he's yet to take a win in Europe this season. And you do wonder whether that will play in the back of his mind whilst he makes his debut at the Tour de France in a couple of weeks. So today's poll is a very simple one. Will Fernando Gaviria win a stage of the Tour de France? Yes or no? Let us know your thoughts by clicking on the poll, which you will find on the screen now. BMC bookended the race with an individual time trial win for Stefan Kung on the final day, where his teammate Porte did more than enough to clinch the final general classification. A win which Richie says is the biggest of his career and which he dedicated to the late BMC Racing owner Andy Rees. Last year's Criterium du Dauphiné winner Jakob Fuglsang showed that he's also ready for the Tour de France. He pulled out one of the best time trials of his career and moved himself up to second on GC, with Nairo Quintana finishing in third. The OVO Energy Women's Tour may only be in its 5th year, but it's quickly established itself as the premier stage race on the women's calendar. As ever, this year's event was 5 days long and attracted many of the world's top riders. And topping them all on day 1 was Jolien D'Hoore. Remarkable stuff really from the Belgian champion when you consider that she fractured her collarbone just 3 weeks ago in a crash on the track. Stage 2 turned out to be the most decisive of the race, with some aggressive racing over the final circuit, whittling the group down to less than 20 at front, and it was them who sprinted it out for the win. Marianne Vos of Wow Deals, winner of the first ever edition of the race back in 2014, was the first to kick, but Corinne Rivera of Team Sunweb just about managed to nip past the Dutch woman before the finish line. Vos's teammate Danny Rowe was particularly active and picked up a good few bonus seconds throughout the stage, enough to put her in second place on the GC, sandwiched between Rivera and Vos. Third place for Vos though, behind Sarah Roy on the stage 3, moved her ahead of her teammate Rowe in the general classification, and from there, things didn't really change a whole lot. Former world champion Amelie Dideriksen of Boels Dormans won stage 4 in a sprint, and then the much anticipated stage 5 around Snowdonia, which we all thought would shake up the GC, was far less decisive than we, or indeed the riders, had predicted. Rowe did well to get through that stage, having crashed badly at the end of the previous day. She was helped actually by Gary Darling-Parks, who made a 4-hour round trip to treat her injury that evening. Third place overall was the reward for her suffering through the final stage. It was a day of firsts though on that last day. Lotte Lepista of Cervelo Biglia took her first win of the season, whilst Corin Rivera took the first GC win of her career. Quite surprising given her impressive palmarès thus far, and perhaps a sign that she is far more than just a sprinter and classics rider. Perhaps a future in GC beckons. Many of the big sprint hitters used the Tour of Slovenia as their final tune-up race for the Tour de France, but a crash-marred finale in stage 1 meant that Cavendish, Ewan and Kittel were nowhere to be seen as Consonni crossed the line in first position, taking the leader's jersey to boot. Their only other opportunity was the following day, but none of them could match the speed of Dylan Groenewegen, who I think could be the man to beat in the Tour de France sprints this year. Rigoberto Urán showed that 2 months back at home in Colombia was actually spent training. He won stage 3 in an uphill sprint against South African champion Daryl Impey, but he wasn't able to go with the local favourite Primoz Roglic on the Queen stage the following day. Former ski jumper attacked on the final climb and soloed to the finish, whilst demon descender Matej Mohoric, also of Slovenia, finished second on the day, 33 seconds down. And Roglic would back that result up with the win in the final day's individual time trial and therefore the overall classification too. That's his third stage race win in a row. He of course won the Tour of the Basque Country and the Tour de Romandie already this year, and you do wonder whether he might surprise some of the more established names at the Tour de France this year. Time will tell, but I have a hunch he's going to run top 5, maybe even the podium. You heard it here first. Or maybe you didn't, but if he does, I'll take it. Next up, it's the Route d'Occitanie. Thanks to Tuchel for the help with pronouncing that under last week's Racing News show. In all honesty, the Route du Sud was far easier, but still. We had a very intriguing finish to stage 1. There, Nacer Bouhanni sprinted to the win. Nothing too controversial or surprising there. But in second place, and almost coming around him, was his teammate Christophe Laporte. Things haven't been plain sailing on the Cofidis ship so far this season, and that seemed as good an indication as any that things still aren't all rosy within that squad. Bouhanni now has 5 wins to his name this season, whilst Laporte has 6, so it'll be interesting to see which of them gets the nod for the upcoming Tour de France, or perhaps even more interesting, if they both participate. The decisive stage came on day 3, and you can probably guess Alejandro Valverde proved to be a class above the rest there. He'd gone clear on the final climb with an informed Danny Navarro of Cofidis, plus King Kenny Elizondo of Team Sky, who has not long finished the Giro d'Italia. That would be the second time in less than a week that Navarro would have come close to a big win, but what can you do against Alejandro Valverde? He now has 119 career wins to his name, whilst Navarro has 5. That basically says all you need to know, doesn't it? And it would be the same 1, 2, 3 in the final general classification after a reduced bunch sprint on the final day of racing. And what that means is that the Tour de France preparation, at least in terms of competition, is now pretty much over. So it's over to you. We want your GC predictions for the Tour de France. Leave them in the comments section below and you might get a mention on our Tour de France preview, which we'll be shooting next week. Who's going to win, who's going to flop, and who's not going to be on the podium? You never know, you might be the next Cy Richardson.
Vincenzo Nibali is not going to make podium.
Now, last week we said that we would give a brief mention to the Under-23 Giro d'Italia. This is one of the most prestigious races in the Under-23 ranks and is usually a very good indication of future greatness. You've only got to look at the podiums from the last few years to see that. You'll see the likes of Joe Dombrowski, Carlos Betancourt and Fabio Aru have all finished on the podium in the past. So although you might not have heard of the protagonist this year, I have absolutely no doubt that you will do soon. And what a race we had this year. The pink jersey changed hands no less than 9 times over the course of the 10 days, and every single stage had a different winner. Colombians won 3 stages, 20-year-old Alejandro Osorio taking one of those and spending 3 separate days in pink. Hagen's Berman action were also very prominent, as you'd probably expect from the world's best under-23 team. Sean Bennett won stage 6 and teammate João Almeida lost 50 seconds on stage 9A and would go on to finish second overall at 46 seconds. Heartbreaking stuff for him. There were also standout performances from Team Wiggins' Mark Donovan, who led the race for a day, and from Stephen Williams, who also led it for a day, won a stage and finished 5th overall, backing up his performance and overall win from another prestigious under-23 race, the Ronde de Lizard, from a few weeks ago. Incredibly though, Mark Donovan is just 19 and was born in 1999, which is mightily impressive and also quite depressing if you were born in 1980 like me. The final GC though came down to Sunday afternoon's individual time trial, which was run in a kind of chase-style format, with race leader Alexander Vlasov setting off first from the last batch of 15 riders, the others all trying and failing to chase him down. That was the first big win in the under-23 category for Vlasov, who turned pro for Gazprom earlier this season. Robert Stannard of Mitchelton Scott won that stage and took third overall. And we did get a sprint finish on a climb on time trial bikes between Williams and Osorio for 5th place, with Williams just taking it. I think that format of TTs could be the way forward in the Grand Tours, personally, although Si Richardson doesn't. I'm right, obviously. The Tour de Beauce in Canada has often proven to be a good testing ground for future talent too. Previous winners of that race include the likes of Rory Sutherland, Pello Bilbao, Daniel Gregory and Tom Schoynes. This year's event though went to James Piccoli, and he was the first Canadian victor since Svein Tuft 10 years ago. He took a solo win by 46 seconds on stage 4, which is a 35 lap criterium of 70 kilometres around Quebec, and then he got away in a 4-rider breakaway on the final day. There he managed to put enough time into overnight race leader Sergei Tvetkov to take the overall honours at the race, so well done to you. Right, on to a series of different races now in the ultra-endurance world. First up, we are now roughly 10 days into the Tour Divide. Leading that is Luis Sidor, who's covered 1,750 miles, meaning that he's just 1,000 miles away from the finish line in New Mexico. He's also 100 miles clear of Bailey Newbury in 2nd place, whilst Alexander Hucci still leads the women's event, having covered 1,122 miles. In the Trans Am, Marcel Graeber still leads. He's around about 16 days in and has covered a little under 4,000 miles. He's over 100 miles clear of Peter Anderson, whilst Tanya Hacker has overtaken Simone Bailey in the women's category. Hacker has covered 2,880 miles, and just 68 miles separate the two of them as I speak. Also on at the moment is the Race Across America, or RAAM, where ultra-endurance legend Christoph Strasser has stormed to a 300-mile advantage after just 5.5 days, covering 2,232 miles, an average daily distance of almost 400 miles. Quite staggering. The women's leader there is former winner Nicole Rice, who is also 4th overall, having covered over 1,800 miles. And finally, in the ultra-endurance world, the Lands End to John O'Groats record here in the UK was broken last week by Michael Broadwith. He covered the length of the UK in 43 hours and 25 minutes, breaking the previous record by 40 minutes. Incredibly, he managed to set that record despite some extremely bad weather en route and a neck which basically wasn't working. Much more on that on the GCN show tomorrow, so make sure you join us for that. And finally, for something even more different, we've got our first ever report here on a Brompton bike race. This, though, was no ordinary Brompton bike race, if such a thing exists. This was the Brompton Invitational at the Herne Hill Cycling Revival Festival. 48 riders were invited, split into 2 heats of 24. 12 from each heat went forward to the final. Each rider at the start had to do a Le Mans-style start, in which they first had to unfold their Chapter 3 edition Brompton before racing around the track. Beating luminaries such as former pro David Miller and cycling commentator Ned Boulting was Alec Briggs, who not only came away with the win, but also a pretty cool £10,048 in prize money. It's not a bad day out, is it? An equivalent, basically, to 7th place overall at the Tour de France. My training for that begins tomorrow. Right, that's all for this week. I hope you'll join me again next week. First up, have you ever wondered what is faster out of aero bars and riding on the drops? Emma gets all the science done right here.